Now, I've got an exclusive interview with Alec Shelbrooke MP, Conservative MP for Elmut and Rothwell. It's part of my Real Me series. He believes there's a problem with the system that doesn't get too many MPs from working class backgrounds, as it costs a fortune to stand for election. Alec is also a big campaigner on women's health, and he feels that women are routinely let down by the NHS. But he also tells us why he came to politics too, and that's where we start. Alec Shelbrooke, you're from a working class background, you were educated at comprehensive school. Did you ever think about being Labour?
No, that's a really interesting question, Gloria, because growing up in the 1980s, I think that politics was very polarised at that point. And I think that the influences that were around me were more about how sort of the issues that were coming from the Labour Party at the time, which seemed to be more control, actually pushed me more to the Conservative Party rather than the Conservative Party dragging me in. So I think I sort of just established that brand of politics and sort of knew my mind quite early on and thought, not the SDP Liberal. I mean, we forget the SDP was quite a power in those days. And it was the Conservative Party. And I've realised throughout my life I'm Conservative to the core.
Were your parents Conservatives?
Well, yes, no. I mean, funnily enough, my dad became a Conservative councillor after he retired and actually got elected to the council 3 months before I became an MP. So I think there was a philosophy of Conservatism there, certainly. But in terms of actual involvement, my dad almost did it at the same time I did it.
You've described yourself in the past as a Conservative trade unionist. What does that mean?
So, as I said, I'm a Conservative, and I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in trying to look after yourself as much as possible, that the state should be there as a safety net. But I think it's easier, and you'll understand this, Gloria, as a former MP and as a presenter, it's easy for people like us to just stick our head above the parapet and say what we want. And I think we forget that for the vast majority of people, they find that quite a difficult thing to do. And I think that workplace representation is so very, very important, especially the role of the shop stewards. And I mean, I've been a member of Unite. I was a member of MSF originally, which then became Amicus and then became Unite. And I
quite moderate in the beginning. And
I mean, I left Unite when Len McCluskey became leader. And I think this was always my problem with trade unionism, is that I think it gets too political and sometimes loses track of representing people. But I think if you've got good shop stewards, I think they really do make a difference. And I think you often need to try and separate out the top leadership of unions and what the shop stewards actually do for you. And I think it's a really important part of the workplace to actually have that representation.
There are some MPs from working class backgrounds, but not the majority. Are there too many posh MPs and not enough from backgrounds like your own?
I think it actually speaks to the problem of the system, that it costs a fortune to get there. I roughly spent £10,000 a year for 10 years, which I didn't have, and my mum and dad helped me out enormously, and I had to pay all that money back, and I remortgaged my house. And I think it's actually really hard to get in, and it's a gamble. You know, my seat was a 6,000 Labour majority seat. And you look at it now and you think, oh, well, that's not going anywhere. But that's what it was. There was no guarantee we were going to win. And I stood in 2005 in Wakefield, and I knew I wouldn't win there. But, you know, we did the effort. But it's a huge financial commitment. It's a huge pressure on you in terms of time. And you'll be very well aware of all this, Gloria. But so I think it just naturally becomes easier for people with wealth behind them than it does for people who have to go out and earn every penny.
What do we do about it? Do you have any solutions? I think everybody would acknowledge that that is a problem.
One of the things I'd like to see happen, which I'm really disappointed that the government didn't do, I really wanted the election period shortened back from 25 days to 17 days. And I wanted a period of time defined as when you dissolve Parliament as to when an election starts. Because as candidates, we're all still getting paid as MPs. But if you take the 2017 election, it was a 9-week campaign. People don't start campaigning once the short campaign starts. They start as soon as Parliament is dissolved. And my experience in 2005 was that really from the end of January, because I was fitting kitchens and bathrooms at this point, I was self-employed and I wasn't working. And then you got into the actual campaign and I wasn't earning at all. So I think we forget that the longer you have those campaigns, the so much harder it is for people to actually earn a living and keep themselves going.
You were fitting kitchens and bathrooms when you fought for the then unwinnable seat of Wakefield, now a conservative seat. I guess you would know, or you would have experienced, the good and bad behaviour in people who employ people to do their kitchens and bathrooms. Are there some people who don't treat our people who fit our kitchens and bathrooms properly?
It's a really interesting question because it's such a fascinating social study to spend 1 week behind somebody's front door. And you get to see so much of the different family units. And you can often see, first of all, to answer that question directly, I never had a problem with people employing me, etc. But what I thought was fascinating was in some of the more traditional working class areas, there was a really strong family unit. And in the sort of really rich mansion areas, which I was doing, there was no family unit at all. I mean, mum and dad were out of the house at 7, back about 10, 3 children, look after themselves, neighbour pop around. It was fascinating to see that side of things. I think on the whole, as I said, actually used to get people wanting to talk to you as you're trying to work, and that could be a little difficult at times. But you never had any sort of abuse like that.
So fitting kitchens and bathrooms is an interesting sociological study. I bet being on the 1922 committee during Theresa May's reign was an even more fascinating study because, my goodness, I was in Parliament, you were obviously in Parliament. That was a seriously turbulent time when her leadership was continuously under threat after that 2017 election. What was it like being on the 1922 committee during that time?
Well, I mean, a real life experience, no doubt about it. It's a fascinating thing that you've got sort of 12 executive officers and 6 officers, and the way the party had elected people, the 12 exec members were spread from all wings of the party, and so when it was really getting to its height, it was proper ferocious, serious arguments. And you say you leave it in the room, and you do, but you didn't talk to each other outside. It was so tense. And I think that genuinely the problem was trying to find a way through this. And that just became harder and harder and harder to do. And ultimately, I think the mistake Theresa May made, she should have just pulled the rug and gone to the country and said, we're not getting anywhere here. Pulled the rug, go to the country and see what happened. As it was, we didn't. And eventually she resigned, and the pressure built and built and built. But it's interesting how the party has come back to heel. Those divisions didn't last, but at the time they were deep, deep-rooted divisions. And being the representative body, because we're sort of the trade union of the party, and being the representative body, trying to bring all those different factions together and steer a way through was intense. I do think it's interesting how we healed all of that. I think there were other ways that things could have been achieved and pulled the rug, which was what I wanted to see happen. See what happened after that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had the same tensions. So I was in a minority of Labour MPs who'd voted Remain, but felt very strongly that we should respect the result. And you stop speaking to people who you've known for years because they take a different view. Did you have experiences of that during that campaign? People who wanted to
depose Theresa May during that time. Did you lose friends, even though you've made them again now?
Well, certainly without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, if you looked in the tea room at the time, you saw groups appearing and people, I mean, you would have witnessed it yourself, and I witnessed it down at your end. I mean, it just kept happening. These groups formed, and never the twain doth met at that time. And it certainly was. It wasn't enough for some people that we respected the result. It was, I don't even know particularly what they wanted. I mean, I voted Remain, but was absolutely crystal clear that whatever the decision was had to be implemented. Now, there were ways to go about that. And I think that one of the problems was Northern Ireland, which is still the problem today. And I think Theresa, as a unionist absolutely to her core, was trying to keep the whole of the United Kingdom under the same rules. And how do you go about that? And that's where the dividing line came. So it was sort of fudged. And now I don't know where that's actually going to be resolved. So it was... the issues haven't gone away, but they were done in a way that could heal the party back together. Those divisions in the tea room aren't there now, but at the time, gosh, it was vicious.
Yeah, indeed. And so what we all want to know is, because during Theresa May's reign, there's lots of speculation on how many letters have gone in. During Partygate, not so much now, because arguably there are bigger things to talk about, but how many letters are in? Did you know how many letters were in under Theresa May as a member of the 1922 committee?
No, nobody knows. And anybody who tells you they think they know how many are in are either a fool or a liar. And I go back to when Jacob Rees-Mogg stood up in the Commons and said he was going to put his letter in, and they all paraded outside Victoria Tower thinking they had enough. Well, they didn't. Because nobody knows how many letters are in, and they never will know how many letters are in. And it was another month before it got the number of letters. I mean, you get asked all the time as a Conservative, have you put your letter in, etc. And I just refuse to comment on letters, because I watched on the 1922 how corrosive just the conversation about letters can be. And so I never comment either way, because I think that you can really dig yourself into a hole. But the truth of the matter is, only one person in the world knows how many letters are in.
That Graham Brady. He's got some power. Now, finally, let's talk about politics, because what was interesting when I was doing my research is how much you have campaigned on women's health issues, whether that be endometriosis or surgical mesh. Why? Very welcome, by the way, for a man to take up these challenges and fights and campaigns. But why is it important to you?
So first of all, I find it a strange question when people say, why are you dealing with women's health issues? Well, the majority of my constituents are women. So why would I not take up their issues? And I've got involved through constituents coming to me. A constituent came to endometriosis. A constituent came to me about mesh, things I didn't know about at the time. So I started to look into it. And then to my horror, I realised most people haven't got a clue about these things. And then I just really feel that women are being let down every day by the NHS. And it's really important that, I mean, they're falling into so many different categories, but I mean, endometriosis as a starting point, most women don't know about it. And how do you know you've got a disease if you don't know it exists? And sort of an 8-year diagnosis time, and it is destroying women's lives. Dozens of women kill themselves every year because of the pain. They can't go on. You know, surely we need to pick up on that. And then we've got the mesh issue. An operation done by the NHS saying it was some sort of miracle cure. Well, unfortunately, you get 8-10 years down the line before the problems presented themselves. Then they're saying, oh, well, we can't do anything because the operation was 8 years ago, and they've deemed them a success. And now we're just battling to have this removal. But the reality is there's not enough skilled gynecological surgeons in the country to make a real impact. And there are thousands of women who this is a problem for or going to be a problem for. And you just have to speak to a constituent who was actually roughly our age, Gloria. We're roughly the same age, and, you know, roughly our age. Life finished, ruined. She was a physiotherapist. She can't stand for very long. She has no sexual stimulation at all. Her marriage fell apart. She's in constant pain. And she said to me the other day, she said, have you ever trapped a nerve in your neck? Well, I have. I don't know whether you have. And it's a horrid pain. She goes, I have that pain in my leg constantly, and it will never go away. And she's got to live with that for the rest of her life. Now, hers, it could have been a lot better if she'd had the mesh removed much earlier on. There are other women going down this path. And the problem is it was described as getting hair out of chewing gum. So it's so difficult. And I just feel that there's just not enough of a voice for women's health issues. And I think that men, it's easy. It's prostate or testicular cancer. That's roughly where you get to the end of it. With women, it's such a whole host of more complex issues that I don't think they're given the time and attention that it should be given. So there's several things I want to see happen. I want the NHS to have proper programmes in place to deal with the mesh issue. I want proper education programmes. I want proper research. I want proper diagnosis of endometriosis. I want the NHS to stop being sexist, quite frankly, and just patting women on the head and say, well, go and take some ibuprofen, it's just women's problems. Come on, we're in the 21st century. Surely we can do better than that. So, I think there's too many people suffering from the same thing. And endometriosis affects 10% of women. That's over 3 million. How can it be a disease we don't know much about?
Welcome to the struggle, brother Alec Shelbrooke. Seriously, really interesting. Really interesting to talk to you both about your personal history, what brought you to politics, but on women's health campaigning. Glad to have an advocate like you. Thank you,
Gloria.
Alec Shelbrooke.